Hello. This week we're going to be talking about asymmetric information, talking just about information in general, looking at cost of information, middlemen, moral hazard, adverse selection. We'll get into, the definition of asymmetric information and all these things. Then we're going to look at some examples. So what do we do when we have choices with uncertainty? We're going to talk about the principal agent problem, the markets for lemons, and then we'll look at statistical discrimination. So, asymmetric information is any time that buyers and sellers are not equally informed about the product, or any two sides of the market. You have one side that knows more than the other. So, one party has more information relevant to the sale, relevant to the transaction than the other party. Sellers are going to be more likely to be well informed. They're going to have information that the buyer does not have. This doesn't have to be the case. So, there are some examples where the buyers are more informed, and we'll talk about some of those examples now. But oftentimes, especially when we're dealing with products or labor markets, the sellers tend to be more well informed. Asymmetry means it's not equal. So something that's symmetrical, like a circle that's symmetrical, it's the same on both sides. So asymmetric means it's not the same on both sides. One side knows more than the other. So this happens because there's some kind of hidden characteristics or hidden actions that both sides don't have access to. It can be difficult to determine the quality before purchase. Maybe this happens with used goods or job applicants, internet sales, and it could be that the person selling it is not advertising it correctly. Now, I personally have purchased things on the internet that when they came to me were not at all what I expected. One time I got this box that was supposed to help for storing blankets, and it came in, it was like so teeny tiny. Like, okay, I can't fit a blanket in there. How do you advertise it like this? And so it's tricky, especially with internet, because you can't really see what you're getting. They can show you a picture, but it might not be of the actual item. With used goods, it could be the actual thing that they're saying that they're giving you, but you don't know what type of wear and tear it had. Uh, there may be damage that's easy to hide on initial inspection that's going to come up later. This can happen with vehicles. If you buy a used car, it could have been in a flood or some other kind of damage that they were able to clean up, but has actual long-term negative consequences for the car. Job applicants. So you're selling your labor. Firms are the demand side. Job seekers are on the supply side. And obviously, when you're applying for a job, you're going to say, I'm great. I'm always on time. I turned in all of my homework. My economics professor loved me. I am just the most amazing person ever. You absolutely must hire me. And that doesn't have to be true, right? Maybe you had ChatGPT do all of your answers, or your neighbor. You could have had a lot of cheating. Maybe you were late all the time. But it's not in your best interest to reveal that to your employer. And so you're going to hide those characteristics or hide those actions. So asymmetric information causes market inefficiencies because the seller is saying it's higher quality than it is, which means the buyer is probably paying too much. And we're going to talk about the fact that search costs can be high. And so once a decision has been made, people are going to make commitments to end the search. So you're going to get a lease for an apartment. You're going to get married. There's going to be an employment contract. Even though there may be information that one side does not know or does not have, because some of those costs are so high, we want to end that. When you're looking at hiring and training a new employee, there are estimates that it costs $60,000 to $80,000, even more. And so it's like we may have picked someone who's not great, but it's cheaper just to stick with them and train them, maybe get them through the program. Or same thing with getting married. This may not be the perfect person, but we've decided that this is good enough. So dating is annoying, it's expensive, it's hard. Let's get married. Apartment lease, it takes a lot of time to find someone. Every month the apartment is not rented, they're losing money, and maybe you may not have the perfect tenant, but if they meet, some basic criteria, you're going to say that's going to be good enough. So information is not free. We are going to have some costs to information. First is going to be time. You're going to take time talking to people, going to stores, reading reviews. It's not going to be free. at least time cost. And depending on what you're purchasing, what you're looking at, you're going to hire somebody, you may be doing a lot of research, spending a lot of time reading about this, figuring out what their qualifications are, checking their social media to see if it matches up with what they're saying. If you're purchasing something, you may check a bunch of different sites. You may try to talk to some people who've purchased this. There's potentially very high time cost in finding the information. You also might need to pay money. So sometimes you need to pay to access information. If you're trying to look up somebody's phone number, sometimes you have to pay to do a person search or a phone number search. If you're doing research, you may need to pay to access the data for your research. If you're buying a house, you may need to pay a realtor. Oftentimes there actually are, physical or explicit costs to getting information. And when we have someone who specializes information, it's going to reduce those costs. So, real estate agents and insurance brokers, even Amazon, specialize in information and they reduce costs. They help customers potentially make better choices. And so they get paid for that information. Real estate agents, they specialize in knowing everything about the different neighborhoods they may be taking you, what houses have been for sale in the past few years, what they expect the housing market to do in the future. And so they're going to have a lot of information available that you are not going to directly have yourself unless you spend many, many, many hours. And a lot of people don't have that time. And who knows, maybe it's 100 hours or 1,000 hours or 5,000 hours. We don't quite know how much it is. So we are going to do our own research to some point, and then we're going to stop and transfer over to a real estate agent who can help with all of that other information. An insurance broker or stockbroker, anything with the word broker in it, usually is somebody who's in the middle. We'll get to middlemen in just on the next slide, but it's somebody who gets access to that thing. So an insurance broker helps people get access to insurance. Now, sometimes it's just through one company. So you may be an insurance broker at AAA, and you're just selling people only AAA insurance. But there are other insurance brokers that work with an exchange, and they can find insurance for people at all sorts of different companies. And so they specialize in where can you get the best rate for this thing, for your demographics, for whatever is going on. They have access to all this information. They've spent lots of time doing it, and so they know where to go and what to look for. Amazon is also a specialist in information, partly through the review system. So if you want to know anything about a product, you search it on Amazon. There's 10,000 reviews, good or bad. You can get all sorts of information there. It also specializes in helping you know prices, how many people have purchased things. There's a whole bunch of data you can actually get by checking Amazon. And while they do sell a lot of products, one of the reasons they are so popular is because they have given customers access to this great amount of information. So, middlemen, or sometimes called intermediaries, are someone who is in between the producer and the consumer. So, an insurance broker is somebody who they don't produce the insurance. They're just helping connect the customer with the insurance company. They specialize information and they earn money because they reduce consumer information costs. So they may be able to find something in 5 minutes that's going to take me 20 hours to find. And so it's going to be worth it for me to pay them some amount of money so I don't have to spend that time cost. We do see that middlemen are declining. Information is much cheaper because of the internet and computer software. They can handle more clients for the same reason. And consumers can find more information for themselves. So you don't have to have an stockbroker. You don't have to have a real estate agent. Some of these transactions we can actually do without the middleman because so much of the information is now available. But they do reduce costs. And let's say you've never purchased a house before, you're moving to a new area, the market is acting weird, you're not really sure. It, it could be very beneficial to hire a real estate agent, even though the costs may be very high. They are able to know what to look for in a house, what you may be missing. Even if you tour the house, they may know like, hey, you actually need to go and check this thing, check the water heater, check these things. They're a sign of good house, bad house, and they can negotiate the sale. Other times, it may be an area you're really familiar with. Maybe you're purchasing the house from somebody that you know, and there's reasons why you may not want to use a real estate agent, but typically people are going to use them. They're going to use middlemen because they do reduce costs. So we're going to do what's called a rational search. We are going to use costs and benefits to determine how much time we should spend searching for information. And the idea is that we're going to keep searching as long as that marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost of finding that next piece of information. So let's do some examples. I want you to think about which of the following will have higher search costs. So, a restaurant where you're going to go buy lunch for yourself today, or a restaurant where you're going to take somebody on a date, which would have a higher search cost. I've heard good arguments for both, but I would say most of the time people say a restaurant to go on a date because you want to make sure it's somewhere special. The person you're going with, you want to make sure they like it, especially if you don't know them very well. You're gonna have to figure out if they have food allergies, likes or dislikes. For lunch, it's just like I'm hungry. I've got this much money. I've got this much time. We tend to not spend as much time thinking about where to go to lunch. Okay, what about an apartment to rent in a crowded city or an apartment to rent in a suburb? Okay, I've also heard arguments on both sides for this. Crowded city argument is there's not a lot of options. It may be hard to get an apartment. You don't necessarily know if it's a good deal or not. There's a lot of competition, so you may need to spend a lot more time figuring it out if it's a good deal because you don't want to accidentally sign a long-term lease for an apartment that you may be overpaying for. Argument for the suburb is that everything's a lot more spread out. So even though you do have access to way more options, you're gonna have to spend a lot more time driving back and forth looking at all of your choices. So I think you could make a good argument for either. Although typically people I know who live in crowded cities do spend more time looking for apartments just because they're harder to come by, especially in your price range. What about which college to attend versus which subject to choose for your major? Okay, so I think, yeah, this is individual to each of you. Some of you spend a lot more time on which college to go to. Some of you are going to spend a lot more time on what to major in. Some of this depends on your personal preferences. Maybe you've always, I don't know, since the time you were 5 years old, you've decided you're going to major in economics. You've known since a child this is your favorite subject. So that was easy. And you have to spend a lot more time picking which college you want to go major in economics and get your degree. For other people, maybe you don't know what you're going to major in, you don't know what you want to do with your life, you don't know what you want to do for a career. College was just kind of easier. I'm going to pick something near my house, something that's in my price range. I went to community college my first year. I really didn't know where I was going to transfer or what I was going to major in. And I went on a visit with one of my friends to the college that her cousin went to. And I was like, cool, there's dorms. This is fun. People live here. There's a cafeteria. I'm going to go here. And, it was a very quick decision for me about, which school to go to. And then for picking my major, it was a lot harder because I really didn't know what I wanted to do. The school that I decided to go to didn't have an economics major. The business program was full. So it was just, that one was a lot harder for me. But for you, picking one or the other may have been harder. What about a job to do during college versus a job after college? Yeah, we could get, I think, good arguments for both. I would say job after college probably has a lot more arguments. It's going to be much more long term. You may be looking at traveling, moving to a different state, a different country. You're trying to pick the best company, the best role for yourself. How can you, maximize that starting salary you get? Job during college, you may have search costs because you have to find something that's flexible with schooling. You're looking for what pays the most. That's also part time. But since your options are a lot more limited, you're probably going to spend less time searching for a job during college than you will after. Um, you could argue that maybe the college degree opens doors for you, and so you have a harder time finding a job without a degree than with a degree. So there are definitely ways to make arguments for both of those. What about a used car versus a new car? Probably a used car is going to have more search costs because there's a lot of hidden information. You may be buying it from a dealer, you may be buying it from an individual person, but there's a lot of stuff about the car you're going to have to figure out. So, how old is it? How many miles? You're going to have to find a mechanic who's going to check it out. You're going to have to figure out financing, how you're going to get, can you get a warranty? There's a lot more information. New cars, it tends to be more standardized. You're going to get it through the dealer. They have a sort of set uh, thing they do. It comes with a warranty, so probably used car is going to have higher search costs. So we're going to have to make choices with uncertainty. We don't necessarily know what the outcome is going to be. And no matter how much information we have, there's always going to be some element of uncertainty. We can never really have all of the information, which is really annoying as an economist because one of the assumptions we make is that people have full information. So everybody knows everything, and that's how we can get to these market outcomes. But in reality, there's always going to be some element of uncertainty. So, how do we evaluate choices when we have uncertainty? Well, we use math, we use statistics and probability. We figure out what are some possible outcomes and what are the chances that that outcome is going to happen. In this case, we're going to have a couple examples where we're going to take two choices. So, either option A is going to happen or option B, and we're going to calculate the expected value. Now, in a lot of the things that you're going to look, especially earlier on in economics, this is called calculating the expected value of a gamble. So, gamble just means it's uncertain. We don't know the outcome, it's not guaranteed. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to a casino and playing poker. Okay, so let's say you interviewed for two companies last month and expect job offers from both. Today, you got a call from ABC Company. They've offered you an annual salary of $75,000 per year, but they do need an answer by the end of the day. The other company, Cookie, they're going to have an offer to you next week, and based on your research, they have a 30% chance of offering you $90,000 and a 70% chance of offering you $65,000. So, should you take the offer from ABC or should you wait until next week and take the offer from Cookie? So if you take the offer from ABC, it's guaranteed $75,000. And if you wait, you don't really know what the other company is going to pay you. You're going to estimate based on your research into this information. So for this, what we're going to do is we're going to calculate an expected value. This is a way of calculating a payoff with uncertainty. You could do this for economics. You could do this with weather, for what job to pick, who's going to win an election. Anytime you have something, you can calculate an expected value. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the probability times the value of an event and then add it to the probability times the value of the other event. So in this case, the expected value from ABC's job offer is 1 times 75,000. And it's 1 because it's 100%. Okay, 1 is 100%. If we had, like on the last slide, 30%, that's going to be 0.3. 70% is going to be 0.7. You add 5%, that'd be 0.05. Okay, so we're going to use the decimal rather than the percentage. Although, if you, depending on what type of calculator you're using, sometimes you could say 30% times this and it does it automatically. But otherwise, we'll just use that decimal or fraction. So ABC, 100% chance times 75,000. It is not unexpected. We know what is happening. The expected value from Cookie, though, there is a 70% chance, so 0.7, of earning $65,000. So 0.7 times 65,000. And there's a 30% chance of earning 90,000, so plus 0.3 times 90,000. So we've added those together and we get an expected value of $72,500. So when we're comparing these, expected value, we get ABC is 75,000 and Cookie is 72,500. I'm going to talk about risk preferences on the next slide, but for now we're going to assume risk neutral, which means you always just pick whatever has the higher expected value. So in this case, we're going to say, let's take the offer from ABC because while there is a chance that we might earn more from the other company, there is a bigger chance we're going to earn less. And when we look at that combined expected value, it's lower than ABC. Okay, so we're going to choose whatever has the highest expected value. In this case, that means we're going to take the job from ABC and we're not going to wait to hear the offer from Cookie. Now, are you going to get an offer of $72,500 from Cookie? No. In this case, it's either going to be $65,000 or $90,000. $72,000 is never going to be the offer. It's just the weighted average, right? The expected value is a weighted average. Um, and it's not just the average of the two because one has a higher probability than the other. So that's why we need to put in those 0.7 and 0.3. So you're going to get 65 or 90. 72 isn't an option, but it helps us sort of put those things together and figure out the odds of getting that higher amount. So attitudes towards risk. Some people have risk preferences. They like taking risks. Some people hate taking risks. For the purposes of this class, we're going to assume that everybody is risk neutral, and I'll get into what that is in just a second. But whether or not you take ABC or wait for Cookie, it really does depend on your risk preferences. Somebody with a high preference for risk might actually rather wait for the offer from Cookie because they like that possibility of the higher salary. Somebody who's very risk averse, like, I don't know, I don't like gamble, I don't like uncertainty. 90 sounds great, but I really don't want 65. They're going to be better off maybe taking the certain outcome. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, let's say we have two options with the same expected value. Somebody who is risk averse will prefer the certain outcome over the uncertain one. So let's say for some reason on the other slide, both ABC and Cookie had an expected value of 75,000. If we are risk averse, we prefer the offer from ABC because it's a guarantee. If we're risk neutral, we actually wouldn't care. If they were both 75,000, we would be indifferent. We would just take either of them because they both have the same expected value. And if you're risk loving, you would prefer to wait until next week from the offer from Cookie that might be higher or might be lower. Risk loving people are willing to take bets or choose an outcome that even has a negative expected value. Now, we won't really get into how to calculate that stuff now. You're going to need utility functions and a whole bunch of other stuff. If you get into some of the more intermediate economics classes, you will definitely get to do this more. So right now we're going to assume that our people are going to be risk neutral. And when we're calculating expected values and choosing outcomes, it's just going to be whichever one is higher. So we're only calculating risk neutral expected values. So the presence of risk and uncertainty don't necessarily cause problems in the workings of markets. As long as everybody accurately knows what all of those risks are, it's okay. So like in our last example, we've got 30% chance of $90,000. Well, what if that's not true? What if somebody went into Glassdoor, Indeed, or wherever they're posting this stuff, and they put in fake salaries, they put in fake information, and so the person making this choice actually doesn't know the truth about what choice they're making. When information is hidden, when one side has more information or false information, it makes it so that we can't really make the most accurate choices. And this leads into the ideas of adverse selection and moral hazard, where choices people are making are potentially going to be harming someone else. So, adverse selection says that people with asymmetric information will participate in trades that benefit them the most. And moral hazard says that getting involved in a risky event when you are partially or fully protected from the risk. So, okay, we're going to look at both of these in more detail. The idea here is that you know the level of risk and therefore adjust your behavior. It's easy to get these confused because they are similar ideas and they both can apply to the same scenario. Adverse selection, think about this as you know the risk before the choice. And moral hazard is you make choice after risk changes. Okay, so people with airbags in their cars are more likely to get into car accidents. So, on the adverse selection side, if you know you are a bad driver, you will buy a car with airbags. You know you're going to get into an accident, so you're going to buy a car that's going to be safer. On the moral hazard side, because airbags are protecting you from some of the risks, you are going to drive more recklessly. So, adverse selection is you are a bad driver first. So, you buy airbags. Moral hazard is you get a car with airbags. So, airbags are first. And so then you drive worse. And it's not necessarily that you're being a bad driver. So think about like seatbelts. Okay, if you have no seatbelt in your car, you are going to drive slower than when you have a seatbelt in your car. Okay. Why? Because you're willing to take some certain level of risk. So let's say you're okay with the risk of being hurt while driving of 1%. And if there's no seatbelts in your car, that might mean you're gonna just go like 5 miles an hour. Because if you get an accident 5 miles an hour, you're probably not gonna be that hurt if you're not wearing a seatbelt. Okay. So no seatbelt. But if you do have a seatbelt, well now you can go 60 miles an hour or 40 or whatever the speed limit is. But you can drive a lot faster with that seatbelt because it reduces that risk of being hurt. And so this is what we mean by driving more recklessly. You're going to drive faster, maybe checking your phone while you're driving or doing other things that are not necessarily super safe. Okay, so moral hazard is you're protected from risk and so you become more risky. And adverse selection is you know you're risky and so you get protection. So, Affordable Care Act, it required that all people had to buy health insurance, but because of adverse selection problems, it also made everyone, even if they were healthy, also buy health insurance. Now, there's been a lot of changes to this. It's been going back and forth. Some years there's requirements that everybody has health care, or you're going to have to pay a fine. Other years where they took the fine off, depending on who is in the administration, it has definitely been changing. But it goes to the idea that there should be access to healthcare people, access for, I can't talk today. There should be access to healthcare for people, even if they don't get it through their employer. And so the way that insurance works, and this is all insurance, is that you have some people who pay into the insurance pot. You pay some kind of premium. Okay, so whether this is health insurance, car insurance, whatever it is. So you have a bunch of people pay in a premium. And then only if you get in a car accident or you need health services do you get paid out. Okay. So maybe three people pay money in and only one person gets money out. And this is important because the amount that you're taking out is a lot more than what you're putting in. Let's say everybody puts in $1 and then this person who gets hurt or has a health problem takes $3 out. And so you need people paying in who aren't taking money out. And so when healthcare expanded, the idea is that now you're going to have more sick people joining this pot, but these people are all also going to be on this side where they're taking money out, right? So they're going to be putting in less than what they're taking out. Oops. Why is this on my screen? Can you even see that? Or is it just annoying me? Okay, there we go. Okay. And so the idea is like if we're going to expand healthcare, we need to make it mandatory for even healthy people because we need more people also now. So for every one of those unhealthy people, we need three more people who are healthy paying into the system. So whether it's fire insurance, car insurance, whatever it is, all insurance works the same way. A lot of people are putting money in, and only some of those people are taking money out. Financial crisis of 2007, we had mortgage insurance, And this is still required if you get a home loan. If it's a certain amount of money for a certain number of years, you have to buy insurance, which removes the risk of default from the lender. So, default is where somebody does not pay back their loan. So, let's say I have a mortgage from my bank and I have to pay for mortgage insurance. And I decide I'm not going to pay for my house anymore. I'm just going to walk away. Whatever, the bank could deal with it. They technically still own it. They can go make a claim with their insurance and get paid back all of their money so they don't have any loss from me doing so. And so this is helpful. It can make mortgage markets more stable. It makes it so that banks are more willing to lend money to people to borrow homes. But it also led to a lot of banks making bad decisions that led to the financial crisis of 2007. Now, we did not cover this in this class. We talk about it a little bit more in Econ 1A, but definitely look into this if you are interested. So, moral hazard, we have the mortgage brokers. These are just the people who are selling the loan, they're selling the mortgage to the homeowners. And when I say selling, it's because they do make money from those sales. So the mortgage broker gets some kind of commission, and then they take this. What happens to the mortgage broker and their commission if in 5 years I quit paying my loan? Nothing. It falls on the bank, right? So the person who's making the loan, who's selling the loan, they get an instant commission, but they're not going to be responsible if I default. So what they want to do is they just want to sell as many loans as possible, right? As many as they can get in the shortest amount of time. That's how they make the most money. And one thing that made this a bigger problem too in the financial crisis of 2007 were mortgage-backed securities, where banks were taking all of these loans and then packaging them up together and selling them as an investment to people who wanted to be invested in real estate without having to actually buy real estate. And it became this whole mess where we had a lot of actually really risky loans in this package. But people weren't treating it as risky because they thought we're just passing the problem on to someone else. If this defaults, it's fine because I don't own the loan anymore. And so this mortgage insurance sort of took off some of that risk and it made people ignore the true risk of some of these loans. And so this leads us into the idea of a principal agent problem. So, principal and an agent, these are who is doing the work and who the work is being done for. Oftentimes, this happens in, like with a job, the employer and employee relationship. The principal is going to be the person that the work is being done for, or the employer. In the other example, we could say the principal would be the bank. And the agent is the person who is doing the work, or the employee. So, we could say that this is the mortgage broker who's getting commission. And so the bank says, "Hey, we're going to pay you to do this work for us. You go get loans, do all the paperwork, process the people. We'll give you a commission, and then we'll earn the interest from the loan." And you might think, "Great, we have the same incentive. I want to make money, you want to make money. We're working together." But we get this thing called the principal agent problem because a couple things: the agent's behaviors are going to be partially hidden. I don't know why this is here. I'll have to fix that on my slide. Okay, so agent behaviors are partially hidden. The mortgage broker, if they're making commission, they want to get as many loans through as possible. Maybe some of the paperwork that people gave them to verify income or other things that you have to verify when you're borrowing money for a house, they're like, "Oh, that's not quite right. I'm just going to ignore this because guess what? It's not my problem if you don't pay it back in a few years. I get my commission now." The principal and agent also don't have aligned incentives. So even if you're saying they're sharing the money, they get commission. Maybe the bank is going to make $100,000 over the whole term of the loan from interest. I don't know why this isn't working today. Okay, from interest. And the agent, maybe they're going to make, $1,500 in commission from the loan. So while they're both making money, the agent only really has an incentive to put an effort that's up to $1,500 for them. While the bank may want them to be putting in $100,000 of effort or whatever it is, right? If they put in more effort, they may actually be able to get them a better amount of interest. Maybe they may be able to close more loans or get less risky borrowers. But the principal and the agent, even when they're trying to earn more money together, don't have aligned incentives. There's an example. We may have watched this earlier in the semester about real estate agents. This is a clip from Freakonomics where they looked at a bunch of data and they looked at how real estate agents typically take 1 week longer to sell their own homes than to sell the homes of their customers. Because in that extra week, they may be able to increase that price by $10,000. They just look a little bit longer, a little bit harder to find that next buyer who's willing to pay a little bit more. But when they're selling it for their clients, even though the home price goes up $10,000 more, they don't get that much money. When you break down the commission, even if it's 6%, they only get half of that and then they have to split it with their agency. They actually only get $150. And so while the home buyer is like, cool, I want 10,000 more, the real estate agent's only getting 150 more dollars. And so they don't have aligned incentives. I may be willing to work 2 extra hours for that 150. If it's going to take me a whole week, it's not worth my time as a real estate agent. I would rather be selling a whole new house and getting a whole another couple $1,000 commission. And this happens in a lot of jobs. Um, it is a moral hazard problem, right? The risk is prevented from the agent. If you do a bad job, typically you're not on the hook. The company is overall. Even if you look at like the difference between profit, which is usually like commission, profit sharing, versus like a flat hourly rate wage. So you can get commission, which is like you make a certain percentage or a certain dollar amount per sale. This happens a lot of times in retail jobs as an incentive to get people to sell more. If you're going to make more money if people buy stuff, you're going to try to encourage them to buy more stuff. Flat hourly wage means you get paid the same amount regardless of how many people are purchasing. And so you look at different retail stores, some of them have commission, some of them don't. If you're a real estate agent, typically you earn a commission. So how much you sell really does determine your income. So, do retail store cashiers behave differently if their pay is tied to commission rather than a flat hourly wage? Yes, they do, right? The data shows that when you make commission, you tend to sell more stuff than when you are on a flat hourly wage. And this is because of incentives. That commission gives people an incentive to sell. Does it fix the problem, the principal agent problem? No, it definitely doesn't. So, because that commission is always still only a much smaller portion of, the total extra profit earned, the agent is never going to be willing to work hard enough or like as hard as the principal wants them to. And it gets really tricky because it's hard to know if people are working as hard as they should or not. So sometimes companies will try to have quotas. You have to sell this much per month. They'll have certain standards you have to meet. Um, but it's just tricky. Okay, I'm going to pause this and then just restart this as another video. So go take a quick break and then come back and we'll talk about the market for a minute.